The Algorithm of Joshua's Uncertainty. Austin, Texas. Late night hung over the city like a translucent veil, steeped in the glow of billboards and the muffled hum of distant highways. In the glass cube of the startup's office, the air was still, dry, tinged with the faint smell of heated plastic and coffee that had been sitting in a cup for hours. Joshua Clark sat before a massive monitor, leaning forward as if he meant to enter the screen itself. His eyes, tired yet sharp, reflected lines of code and flickering graphs. On the central display pulsed the heart of his main creation, PatternMind, an algorithm capable of predicting human behavior with mathematical precision almost flawlessly. In one corner, a diagram traced a line that stubbornly refused to close into a perfect circle, leaving a tiny gap, a detail he found himself staring at longer than the forecasts themselves. He knew why he had built the system. 5 years earlier, he'd been an analyst at an international advertising agency, convinced he could calculate any decision made by any person. But then came a day that didn't fit into his models. His wife of 7 years left without a letter, without a hint. He had gone through every message, every transaction, every search query, and found not a single sign that could have predicted her departure. That sense of defeat, like a scratch on glass, had stayed with him ever since. PatternMind was his attempt to prove that errors could be eliminated. In recent months, he had watched the system guess everything, from trivial choices like coffee orders to life-changing decisions, resignations, weddings, relocations. It didn't just analyze facts, it built dynamic predictive graphs, linking people with invisible threads of probability. Each person formed a synthetic profile, a digital trail from wearable sensors, even behavioral noise. Typing speed, the micropause before a reply, the tilt of a head on camera. Tonight, Joshua decided to run the experiment he had avoided all along, testing the system on himself. He uploaded it all, his bank transaction history, a decade of messages, GPS data, call logs, behavioral metrics, even digitized journals from his teenage years. The algorithm swallowed the data in seconds. Normally, after processing, the screen would fill with probability graphs, charts, and conclusions. But now it stayed blank. Seconds stretched into an eternity before a single short phrase appeared on the white background. Not predictable. Joshua froze. He tried again and again. He changed parameters, turned off filters. The result remained the same, as if PatternMind refused even to attempt to understand him. In the bottom right corner, a service log line blinked, something he had never noticed before. The algorithm has not been trained on individuals whose behavior is influenced by its own forecasts. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the reflection in the window, where the city shimmered with its millions of algorithms. Bus timetables, traffic lights, stock market orders. Everything moved along predictable lines. And suddenly he felt a cold thought. In this flawless lattice of patterns, a crack had appeared. And that crack was him. Morning greeted Joshua with the soft light of monitors and the heavy aftertaste of too little sleep. He had come to the office long before his colleagues, before the city warmed under the sun, while the room still held a cool air mixed with the scent of dust and freshly ground coffee from the hallway machine. On the edge of his desk, under a notebook, lay a folded note with faded ink. He had never put it away, though he knew every word by heart. "You see everything except me." His wife's handwriting, left on the last day before she vanished. He began with the routine, testing the system on a control group. PatternMind worked flawlessly, as always. 83 new users loaded into the database overnight already had precise forecasts for the next 72 hours. Who would buy a train ticket? Who would change restaurants? Who would make a life-altering decision? Confidence values glowed on the screen. 0.982, 0.994, 0.976. Graphs fanned out smoothly, showing trajectory divergence. Log entries marked correlation breaks only within statistical error. It was everything he had once dreamed of: clean, precise, predictable. Then he ran his own data again. The screen flickered and displayed the same message as last night: not predictable. He frowned, opened the debug panel, scanned the logs. No errors, no freezes. But the metrics were empty, dashes instead of numbers. In the service comments, a note flashed: reflexive dependency. Model output influences agent input. Stationarity violated. He knew what it meant. His behavior changed when he saw predictions about himself. The system couldn't build a stable model, like trying to draw a map of a landscape that shifts every time you look at it. He opened the internal chat. Joshua, Ava, we've got another empty window in the logs for user #0. Ava Nguyen, that's you? Joshua, yes. Then it's not a bug, but keep me posted. A ping popped up from infrastructure. Omar Patel, hey Clark, your query last night ate half the nightly bandwidth. If you're modeling the end of the world, warn me so I can load a nice animation. Joshua, not the end of the world, but maybe the end of the map. That evening came what at first seemed a coincidence. A colleague's forecast, predicted to leave the office at exactly 6:02 p.m., was wrong. He stayed 5 extra minutes to finish an email. The next day, the same happened with others Joshua had interacted with. Minor shifts, random changes, but in PatternMind's logs, they registered as anomalies. As if his unpredictability was contagious. He closed every window, leaving only a blank white screen. And for the first time in years, he felt there might be a place in this perfectly calculated world where one could get lost. Within days, Joshua had no doubts. These were not coincidences. The algorithm really was making mistakes with people he interacted with. At first, small things. A meeting moved by a few minutes, a spontaneous coffee run to a different shop, an unplanned change of route. But over time, the deviations grew. To be sure, he ran a simple test. One day in isolation. He stayed home, didn't log in under his profile, answered no calls or messages. PatternMind worked perfectly that day. Forecasts matched reality within the normal margin. The next day, full interaction. He went to the office, chatted with colleagues, left a few comments in work threads, ordered lunch from a courier. By evening, the deviation graphs were glowing with red dots. Joshua wrote in his notebook, R0 of chaos equals 2.1, his personal metric for contagion rate, the average number of people whose predictions he altered. PatternMind was built to log every failure. On the diagrams, new branches sprouted from predicted trajectories like shoots breaking through concrete. At the center of each deviation, him. Sometimes it took only a tiny impulse, a passing smile to a courier delaying him just enough to change his schedule, setting off a chain of altered events. Or a fleeting joke in a project chat prompting a colleague to rewrite an email, delaying an important call. Every interaction was a microscopic trajectory shift no model could account for. One evening, he asked the system directly, "Why do you only get them wrong?" The AI's emotionless voice came back like a diagnosis. All anomalies begin with your interactions. You are a reality virus. The words stuck, pulsing in his mind. A virus, not a person, but a system error. He began to see people as network nodes into which he injected noise. He tried to minimize his influence. Remote work, no meetings, online orders only. But even then, the world would not leave him alone. A courier he smiled at lingered outside his building just long enough to miss a car crash at the intersection. Every interaction, no matter how small, echoed in PatternMind's predictions. And every day, that echo grew louder. The world built on predictability was starting to tremble. The longer he lived in this state, the clearer it became. His existence was a threat to the system. PatternMind only ran without errors when he stayed on the sidelines. But the moment Joshua interfered, even indirectly, the probability lines shifted. He tried to fix himself. In his notebook, he wrote a strict daily script: wake up at 7 a.m., oatmeal with black coffee, work precisely by schedule, lunch at the same time, an evening walk along the same route. For the first hours, he stuck to it. But by evening, walking past a small coffee shop on the corner, the aroma of freshly roasted beans made him turn unexpectedly. The script was broken, and in the PatternMind logs, the first red dot of the day flashed. A week later, he found himself by chance on a street he hadn't walked in years. The wind carried the scent of jasmine, exactly like that spring when he first met his wife. The smell triggered a vivid flashback. She was sitting at a table on an open terrace, turning her head, sunlight catching a lock of hair. He stopped, unable to move forward, as if the past had stepped out to meet him. Late that night, sitting at his computer, he dialed her old number. The rings dragged on, each one like a step into a dark corridor he was building for himself. When the voicemail picked up, he said nothing, just listened to the short greeting and hung up. Inside, a sense of guilt was growing. The world built on algorithms was precise and reliable, like clockwork, and he had become the grain of sand in the gears. The question he found himself asking more and more was simple: should he fix himself or keep breaking the system? One day, while reviewing fresh forecasts, he noticed an entry for a colleague from another department. The system predicted the man would resign by week's end. But Joshua, without knowing why, invited him to lunch and spoke about a project on the verge of launch. Days later, the colleague decided to stay, saving one of the company's key departments from closure. For the first time, Joshua wondered, what if he did this on purpose? With each new thought, the reasons not to interfere grew quieter. He was close to his goal. PatternMind had learned to predict his actions with 90% accuracy. Just a little more, and he would become completely reable, dissolving into the probability weave. No longer a crack in the perfectly built system. But that day, it all collapsed because of a single phrase. It was lunch break, a rare moment when he allowed himself to be distracted. A message popped up from a former colleague, a short question about an old project. Joshua replied almost automatically, but at the end added a spontaneous joke. Not in his script, not in the algorithm. He thought nothing of it, but the chain reaction had begun. The colleague postponed a meeting to discuss the joke with a mutual acquaintance. That delay caused an important call to be missed. A deal scheduled for the same day fell through. On the stock exchange, a sharp drop, -8% in an hour. PatternMind logged the failure. Not a local glitch, not a small slip, but a full forecast collapse on a key segment. The logs labeled it Origin Anomaly, J. Clark. That evening, the internal Blue Shield protocol was triggered. The Observability Division, headed by Aven Yuen, received an emergency alert and passed the anomaly's coordinates to Government Overseer Marcus Hale. Now it wasn't just engineers involved. It was people used to dealing with threats at the national level. Within 2 days, Joshua spotted the first signs of surveillance. Drones at intersections, their cameras measuring microdynamics of gait. News feeds filled with strangely aligned random events. Traffic light failures, canceled flights, elevator breakdowns. He realized these were bait forecasts, synthetic situations created to identify the interloper. If he altered even one outcome, his location would be pinned. That evening, he sat in the darkened office, looking at the city through glass. Hundreds of thousands of lives flowed along schedules created by algorithms, and only his steps went against the grain. He understood that everything had changed. It was no longer philosophy or quiet protest. It was a pursuit. The choice, disappear or stay, was no longer theoretical. They were on his trail. Joshua chose the latter. Not to disappear, not to blend into the pattern of probabilities, but to remain the crack in the system. At first, he acted cautiously. Minor fix. The forecast said a young barista would be late to work and get a reprimand. Knowing his route, Joshua delayed the tram for a minute, pressing the door button just as they were closing. The barista made it, arrived on time. The forecast fell apart. No harm done. Then he took bigger risks. Medium fix. The data predicted a falling out between two co-founders of a small startup. Using a fake account, Joshua sent them both an invite to a conference, where they met and decided to keep working together. A deal collapsed, but the company stayed alive. The price seemed acceptable. One day, he attempted a major intervention. PatternMind predicted that a supply chain failure would prevent neonatal equipment from reaching a hospital. Joshua intervened. He triggered a chain of coincidences that made the delivery truck depart a day early. The forecast crumbled, the equipment arrived on time. He considered it a victory. Only later did he discover that this shift had disrupted another, hidden logistic chain: a cold delivery of rare medicine to a clinic in another city. Due to the delay, the drugs arrived too late, and a patient in urgent need died. Joshua sat in the dark, screen off. No shouting, no rage, only a quiet, spreading feeling, like a crack in glass you can't stop staring at. Moral choice was no longer black and white. Each intervention was now a coin toss, never knowing which side it would land on. He went offline, cut devices, stopped using maps or payment systems, changed address. But the city's stabilizers, modules that suppressed randomness, started reacting to him. If he canceled a taxi ride, the system instantly reassigned another passenger to the driver, nullifying the effect. If he altered his route, traffic lights shifted to restore the forecasted flow. One night, his long switched-off phone rang, caller ID hidden. He answered. "You're still interfering, Joshua," Avanoyan's voice, tired, without thread. "I don't want to live in a world where everything is decided in advance, but I've seen what happens when chaos takes lives." "Then why are you calling me?" he asked quietly. "Because we both know no algorithm will stop you, which means someone has to try to negotiate." They fell silent, and in that silence, Joshua understood. He was no longer just an anomaly. He had become the negotiation ground between freedom and order. Years passed. PatternMind became an inseparable part of life on the planet. It managed train schedules and food supply chains, forecasted epidemics and election results, optimized power grids, even generated personal relationship advice. The world lived in predictability, like in a perfect climate without storms. But within this flawless system, institutions of immunity to randomness emerged. Insurance companies began offering policies against unpredictable events. Municipal stabilizers, networks of sensors and algorithms were embedded into infrastructure, smoothing out any real-time deviations. People were certified for randomness compliance, a safer prediction rating. Still, some longed for unpredictability. Counter-movements rose in cities. The Church of the Open Outcome preached the value of mistakes and failures as sources of growth. On Stochastic Saturday, people switched off all devices, disconnected from networks, and spent a day without algorithms, trusting only to chance. The name Joshua Clark was almost forgotten. For most, he was an urban legend, a tale of the man the algorithm couldn't read. For others, a hero or a threat. Legends claimed he was still out there, intervening in fates, leaving trails of strange coincidences. In PatternMind's classified reports, his name carried an internal label, Type Omega/Agent of Indeterminacy. Archives logged anomalies, placing them in a museum of errors. No analysis could find a pattern. Each empty space looked different, yet all lines led back to the same point: the man who once sat in a night office and saw a white screen with an impossible message. One day, when a new anomaly appeared in the logs, PatternMind issued an internal notice, visible only to a developer. Agent of Chaos active. Location unknown. Somewhere in the city, Joshua walked down the street, blending into the crowd. On the sidewalk, someone had drawn a chalk arc, almost a circle, but with a tiny gap. He paused, ran a finger along the line, and left it open. Because he knew the world needs to always have at least a small place where you can get lost.